Reena had always felt great about her sensitivity. With a keen eye for detail, a freelancing botanical illustrator was renowned for her ability to spot even the smallest changes in her surroundings. Her instincts thus alerted her to something being strange when her husband, Dario, started behaving differently. Dario was a calm, methodical software engineer who hardly strayed from his schedule. After 8 years of marriage, she never thought he could keep secrets from her, even if their relationship was not without difficulties. But Reena observed minute changes over the last several months. Dario's work schedule grew erratic. Once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, his phone, always face down, was now under protection. His abrupt lack of interest in her was the most disturbing aspect of his beginning business travel to locations she had never heard of. Their once lively closeness had become awkward silence. She battled herself to believe it was burnout or stress. But the gnawing sensation in her gut would not let her relax. Friends, sorry to interrupt, but please help me reach 2,000 subscribers by the end of the summer. Let's keep going. One fatal afternoon, she discovered a mysterious hotel receipt buried in Dario's jacket pocket while doing laundry, so verifying her suspicions. A hotel receipt dated the same weekend he claimed to have attended a business conference. Her heart thumping, she confronted him late that evening. Dario denied everything, of course, said it was only a late work-related conference, nothing else. Reena, though, was not purchasing it. Reena turned into an amateur investigator over the next few weeks, delving more into Dario's life. She discovered a secret email account not too long ago. She knew his inclinations too well. Thus, the password was easy to figure. She would lose her world over what she found. Dario had never mentioned the man Luca, who wrote the emails. The first emails were benign, covering shared interests and pastimes. But as Reena read more, the message's tone changed, became ever more personal, then unquestionably romantic. Dario had been seeing someone else. Not only a secret gay affair he kept from her for more than a year, but also more than just one. Shock paralyzing Reena prevented her from confronting him right away. She was perplexed and betrayed. How had she failed to notice? Why had he not been honest with her? For weeks, she kept checking the email account, her heartbreak turning into rage as she put Dario's betrayal together. The affair was physical long before she suspected anything, not only emotional. Luca was someone Dario was in love with, not just some flitting around. But the emails included something else, something eerie. Dario's refusal to leave Reena infuriating Luca more and more. In several of the emails, he pushed Dario to do what needed to be done, to break free from his marriage. Luca was erratic, impatient, and his comments suggested something far darker than simple irritation. He wanted Reena to be gone. Tragic events happened just as Reena was deciding how to approach Dario with all she had discovered. She answered a knock on the door one morning. On her porch, 2 detectives stood with serious expressions on their faces. Dario was dead. The investigation started right away. Dario's body had been found far from his regular haunts, in a remote forest. When a hiker came upon him, forensic teams were dispatched right away. The lead investigator, Kian, told Reena that the circumstances of Dario's death seemed dubious, while she sat in shock trying to absorb the news of her husband's passing. Though his posture and some hints pointed to foul play, there were no clear indicators of trauma. To assist ascertain the time of death, authorities opted to apply forensic entomology. The insects Dario discovered on his body gave important clues, helping to focus the precise window of death he had been through. Further suspicions were aroused by this window, not matching the time Dario was expected to have been at work. Kian started delving further into Dario's life and challenging Reena on their marriage. The detective's keen eyes missed neither the tension in her voice nor her evasiveness in responding. Not yet. Reena was not ready to expose what she had found about Dario's affair. The treachery was still too raw, and she worried about how the police might view her Luca knowledge. Days passed, and the inquiry got more intense. The investigators discovered surveillance footage from a petrol station close to the woodland where Dario's body had been discovered. Dario's car pulled in the video, but he wasn't alone. Just minutes before they headed off together, a man fitting Luca's description entered the car. Dario's phone forensic examination turned up a last message from Luca, requesting to meet in a quiet place to have a conversation. This confirmed the detective's suspicions that Luca had some role in Dario's death. Still, there were far too many unresolved issues. Was that a spiraling out-of-control argument? Alternatively, had Luca's annoyance with Dario erupted into something much more sinister? Now, pushed into the middle of a murder inquiry, Reena knew her own life was about to fall apart in ways she never could have predicted. Hands shaking around her cup of tea, Reena sat in her kitchen, going back to the moment she had found Dario's secret. Though nothing compared to the terrible knowledge Luca was now a murder suspect, the guilt, the hurt, and the treachery felt intolerable. Reena knew it would not be long before the police discovered the affair. They were circling closer. Every day, the inquiry into Dario's death got more intense, and the detectives wasted no time concentrating on Luca. Ever the pragmatic investigator, Detective Keon, had assembled the barest outline of Dario's affair, but lacked the finer points. Though the air was heavy with suspicion, the reason stayed vague. Given Luca killed Dario, why? Was it more planned or driven by jealousy? Luca seemed disturbed but firm about his innocence, as Keon started to doubt him. He acknowledged the affair but said Dario had been intending to leave Reena and begin a fresh life with him. Luca claimed they had met that evening in the forest to talk about their future. But things swiftly went bad. Dario, he said, was conflicted, unsure about leaving Reena, and under pressure from Luca to at last decide. Luca swore he never saw him again when Dario dropped him off in the forest. Though the narrative made sense, the detectives felt something did not fit. The research helped Luca's background to become very clear. Often dealing with powerful people, he was a well-known event planner, whose reputation was for being erratic and compulsive when things did not go as planned. His emails to Dario exposed a pattern of control and manipulation. Luca wasn't ready for Dario to cut all ties with his former life. Would that, however, inspire murder? Though the autopsy findings still begged riddles that needed to be untangled, the investigators were not sure yet. More answers came from the forensic entomology examination. Although the exact cause of death remained elusive, the time of death matched the evening Luca claimed to have met Dario. Though Dario's neck showed minor bruising that would point to strangling, there were no indications of blunt force trauma or gunshot wounds. Furthermore, his system contained trace levels of a sedative medication, sufficient to render him unconscious, but not to kill him totally. This begged the troubling question. Was Dario dead, then sedated? Reena was surrounded by her collapsing world. Often visiting her, the police asked more pointed questions about her marriage. Terrified of how the affair would turn out, she had said nothing about it yet. She was the victim's widow and worried about being dragged into the inquiry in an uncontrollably manner. Still, the detectives soon enough discovered. Keon walked up to her with an indisputable truth. Her marriage wasn't as it seemed, and now the research required her candor. Trapped, Reena at last came clean. She shared with them all she knew about the hidden emails, the affair, and how she had come upon the hotel receipts. She also described how Luca's messages had darkened and pushed Dario to separate from their marriage. Her voice shook as she related the last few weeks, confessing that she had been secretly monitoring the emails knowing about the affair. But Keon's next question hit her like a kick to the gut. Reena, before Dario passed away, did you ever confront him about the affair? She halted, not yes. She hadn't. She also suddenly understood the implication of the inquiry. Had the investigators been wondering whether she had had any role in his death? After all, it was not unusual for couples to flare out when confronted with adultery. As Reena defended herself, her heart pounded, since she said she had never once acted on her knowledge. Uncertain of how to approach Dario, and still reeling from the betrayal, indecision had paralyzed her. Her disclosure, however, turned the research in a different path. Had Reena known about the affair, her motivation, at least from the standpoint of an investigator, was obvious. Out of wrath and retribution, was it conceivable she helped plan the death of her husband? Though Reena could feel the detectives' mounting mistrust, their approach was cautious. Luca's narrative kept falling apart meanwhile. His alibi was at best shaky, and in the days after Dario's death, his behavior had grown more erratic. On the night of Dario's death, The police found phone records demonstrating several calls between Luca and an unidentified number. Luca became evasive when asked about the calls, which heightened questions. The number originated with a private investigator Luca hired, a detail he had conveniently omitted to note. Under interrogation, the private investigator turned out an unsettling revelation. Luca had hired him to investigate Reena's background in search of anything that might be used to discredit her, should a legal dispute over Dario's estate develop. This discovery simply reinforced Luca's image as a manipulator, a man ready to do whatever it takes to guarantee his position in Dario's life. Though not in the manner anyone had anticipated, the bits of the puzzle began to fit as the research progressed. Reena's quiet grief was about to be subordinated to something far more explosive. There were secrets yet to be unveiled. Though Reena was also under close inspection, the police were sure Luca knew more than he was revealing. Was she merely another victim of her husband's covert life, or could she have participated in his murder? Reena felt more imprisoned than ever as the walls closed in with every day that went by. Tension permeated the courtroom, the air heavy with expectation as Luca's trial started. For everyone who had followed the case, the murder of Dario had become a sensation, capturing their morbid fascination. A supposedly quiet marriage and a secret affair did not turn into charges of murder every day. Reena sat at the rear of the room, her red eyes from restless nights and countless tears. Her life was on show, visible for everyone to evaluate, even though she was not under trial. Luca sat in the defendant's seat, wearing a sharp suit, but clearly thinner and paler. His eyes flicked frantically about the room, sometimes focusing on Reena. His expression was one of desperation, mixed with defiance. The prosecution had stacked a strong case against him. They went into great length on the affair, his manipulative actions, and the terrifying email exchanges in which he pushed Dario to leave Reena. Still, the forensic study of the tranquilizer discovered in Dario's system was the most damning proof. The prosecutor maintained Luca had painstakingly planned the murder. He strangled Dario in the forest, after first sedating him to get him compliant. The chronology fit, and the forensic entomology offered a clear window of death that matched Luca's last known contact with Dario. The emails, the secret meetings, Luca's mounting annoyance, had all pointed to a man driven by obsession. A man who saw Dario as his possession, and Reena as an impediment to their happiness. But Luca's defense team rebelled and presented a quite different picture. They presented Luca as a man in love who Dario's dishonesty and uncertainty had imprisoned in an impossible position. They claimed that Dario's system's tranquilizer was self-administered, maybe a means of help for him to cope with the tension of his double life. The defense questioned the strangulation theory, speculating that Dario's death might have come from an accident, a fall or some other mishap in the far-off forest. Ultimately, no clear evidence connected Luca to the real moment of death. The defense also brought Reena front stage. Her participation in the case cannot be overlooked, even though she was not accused of any crime. They underlined how she had failed to confront Dario, stalked his emails, and found the affair. They suggested that her awareness of the affair could have caused an emotional collapse. Perhaps, they said, Dario's death was a sad but inadvertent result of a confrontation gone bad. Reena sensed the weight of the courtroom's eyes upon her. Every whispered comment, every glance, seemed to challenge her part in the catastrophe. She knew she had not killed her husband, but in some respects, she felt guilty. Maybe things wouldn't have spiraled so far out of control if only she had spoken to Dario earlier and confronted him when she first discovered the emails. But today, it was too late. The prosecution offered the last piece of evidence for the trial, Luca's relationship to the private investigator. The knowledge that Luca had paid someone to investigate Reena's past pointed to a deliberate strategy meant to discredit her. The prosecution claimed that Luca intended to frame Reena for Dario's death, so manipulating the facts to give the impression that she had killed her husband in a fit of jealous wrath. This, they said, was Luca's actual goal, to kill Dario and seize control of his life, while blaming his naive wife for the crime. It was an amazing turn of events that rippled through the court. As the jury worked through the fresh material, they appeared obviously disturbed. As the prosecutor delivered his last blow, Luca's attitude changed from defiance to barely controlled panic. Luca had not only been motivated by love, but also by money. Dario had a small fortune in his estate, which he was supposed to split with Reena. Luca stood to inherit it all when Reena was out of the way. The defense tried one last gambit as the trial almost finished. Hoping his testimony would change the jury, they summoned Luca to the stand. Luca's voice was subdued, almost begging as he spoke of his love for Dario, how he had only wanted them to be together, free from the restrictions of a marriage long since devoid of meaning. He insisted that Dario had been alive, walking away into the darkness of the forest, so refuting any participation in his death. It was too late, though. The evidence, the manipulation, the planning, all too terrible. After just a few hours of discussion, the jury came back with a first-degree guilty of murder. As the decision was announced, Reena experienced an odd range of feelings, possibly relief as well as a great sadness. Apart from killing her husband, this man had destroyed the illusion of her marriage. Though everything, she had loved Dario. Now he was gone. Both the man she believed he was and the man he really had been. Too much. The affair, the lies, the murder. Luca's eyes locked Reena's one last time as he was being carried away under handcuffs. His eyes showed only bitterness. He lacked regret. His love for Dario had become something horrible, something that had devoured not only Dario's life, but also that of everyone around him. Reena questioned whether Luca had ever really loved Dario at all, or if his fixation always revolved more on control and possession. The media frenzy around the trial started to fade gradually, but for Reena, the echoes of everything that had happened were intolerable. The next few weeks after Luca's conviction were dreamlike. Friends, neighbors, even colleagues she had known for years looked at her differently now, as though her whole identity had become twisted in the messy details of her husband's secret life. Every glance seemed to be silent judgment, every conversation full of the unsaid question. How could you not have known? For Reena, not even for herself, but for them, she lacked responses. Though more than that, Dario's absence left a hollow ache that still stung the betrayal. Dario had been the man she loved for almost 10 years, despite his adultery and all else. Together they had created a life, shared hopes, dreams, and future plans that today seemed to be a far-off fantasy. Her had all of that stolen from her by his death and the events surrounding it. Luca's conviction marked only one outcome of the court processes. Reena, the widow of Dario, now had the difficult chore of dividing his estate. It was a sobering reminder of just how quickly her life had changed. Once a comfort, the riches felt to be a weight now. Every piece of land, every bank account, every asset made her remember a life that had fallen apart so totally. Worse, Luca had not given up his claim to Dario's assets. From jail, he had appealed, challenging the will and his rights to Dario's estate, and contending that his relationship should qualify him to a portion of the inheritance. Reena had not expected a legal fight, and it emotionally and financially sapped her. Luca was found guilty of Dario's murder, but the legal system was convoluted, and his appeal meant months, if not years of court fights. Luca, the man who had killed Dario, now battled to recover what remained of his life. It was a terrible irony, but Reena was fighting with others as well. Following the trial, she had re-established contact with a few close friends and those who supported her when the world seemed to turn against her. Among those friends was Ava, a lawyer she had known for years but had drifted apart from following marriage. Ava intervened to assist with the legal process, giving Reena the will to withstand Luca's unrelenting attempts to pull her back into the dream. More nasty information about Luca surfaced as they got ready for the appeal. Luca had a background of manipulating wealthy men, ingratiating herself into their life only to subsequently employ financial pressure and emotional blackmail. Dario had been his most recent victim, but obviously the stakes in this case had risen and a fatal outcome resulted. Luca's emails shown at the trial were only surface level. Ava assisted Reena in finding more proof. Financial records, secret letters, even talks with other men Luca had pursued that presented a picture of a man ready to do anything to get what he wanted. This fresh material enhanced Reena's case against Luca's appeal. His relationship with Dario became abundantly evident as one of manipulation and greed rather than love. Though the procedure left Reena emotionally worn, his appeal was finally turned down. Now completely deprived of any claim to Dario's estate, Luca felt a faint sense of justice. Still, that was a hollow triumph. Legal victories are useless in reversing or bringing Dario back from the damage done. Still, Reena was resolved to reconstruct her life. She withdrew from her work as a botanical illustrator and moved to a more solitary existence with an eye toward healing. The house she had shared with Dario sold for too much memories, both positive and negative. She moved to a more sedate location, somewhere she could start over, away from the whispers and judgment, using the money from the estate. Still, moving forward proved difficult. Reflecting on her marriage, Reena spent many restless evenings trying to make sense of the man she believed she knew against the secrets he had kept. For her, therapy turned into a lifeline as she negotiated the complicated feelings of guilt, betrayal, and loss. She realized over time that Dario's dishonesty was more likely the result of his own anxieties and insecurities than of hers. Though it was only a little solace, it let her release some of the resentment she had harbored for so long. Dario's parents, who had been heartbroken by their son's death, provided one unanticipated comfort. After learning about Dario's affair, they had first been aloof, not sure how to relate to Reena, but they stretched out over time in search of the whole narrative of what had happened. They mourned the man they had lost together, not the Dario who had kept secrets, but rather the man who had once been loving, giving, and compassionate. Their common loss drew them closer and gave Reena less solitude in her suffering. Years later, Reena started to find herself once more. She went back to work, first gently, drawing flowers and plants that brought back simpler days. Her haven had always been nature, where she discovered some sort of tranquility. Dario's betrayal and murder had permanently changed her life, but she was resolved not to allow it define her. Luca's detention turned into a far-off event from her life. Serving a life sentence without chance of parole, he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. His deft charm had at last been revealed for what it was. Conversely, Reena was free to live her life, free from the weight of Dario's secrets hovering over her. Though not in the manner most people discussed forgiveness, Reena developed her ability to pardon over time. She refused to pardon Luca for his manipulation or Dario for the affair. Rather, she pardoned herself for not confronting the truth earlier, for not seeing the signals sooner, for being human in the face of unthinkable treachery. It was a forgiveness that let her release the past and enter a future totally hers, even if it was yet unknown. And thus, Reena started to heal in the silence of her new house among the flowers and plants she loved. Though neither would the strength she had acquired from surviving it, nor would the agony completely leave her. Standing on the brink of the garden Reena had been painstakingly tending in her new house. The little secret corner she had created was evidence of the resiliency she had battled so valiantly. Years had passed since the murder of Dario, since her life had been turned inside out by treachery and catastrophe. Her path seemed to be echoed in the vivid plants and delicate blossoms, fragile but strong enough to flourish in even the toughest circumstances. She felt peace come over her as she ran her fingers along the rosebush petals. From the woman engulfed in anger, uncertainty, and loss, she had come a great distance. The legal fights were over. Most people had forgotten Luca, and the media had turned to other crises. But the wounds of those years stayed carved in her memory, a reminder of how profoundly life might cut when least expected. Luca was serving a life sentence without any hope of release after his appeal came up short. Every now and then, she would hear from someone in town about a documentary on the case or an essay revisiting the drama of her husband's double life. Reena had made peace, though, since many would always define her life based on the scandal that had broken out around her. For her, however, it was something far more profound, a lesson in survival, in understanding the complexity of human nature, and finally, in discovering peace among turmoil. Her current quiet neighborhood was far from the life she had once shared with Dario. None knew her here as the bereaved widow or the woman whose husband had led a covert life. She was just Reena, the botanical artist who worked on her garden in afternoons and spent mornings drawing flowers. It was the simplicity she yearned for, a life free from continual assessment and past weight. Often visiting Ava, her attorney, and now one of her best friends, would sit on the porch with her to remember the turns their life had taken. Though they came from different worlds, Ava had been Reena's lifeline when everything seemed too weighty. Their relationship had been formed in fire. Now there was no need, so they hardly talked about the trial. Women knew that some things were better left in the past. Ava mentioned something that had stayed in Reena's mind, but was hardly discussed one evening while they were sipping a bottle of wine. "Do you give him any thought at all?" With a gentle voice, Ava asked, careful not to aggravate past hurts unnecessarily. Reena had no need to find out who him referred to. Her eyes fixed on the far horizon, where the sun was setting in brilliant pink and orange, she sipped her wine slowly. "Indeed," she said. "Yes, Dario, I mean. Sometimes I wonder who he really was. I loved him, but I'm not sure I ever really knew him." Ava nodded politely. "I believe every one of us has latent aspects of ourselves. Different people hide more than others." "I think you're right." Reena's voice was calm, the storm of feelings accompanying ideas of Dario now still. "Though I will never know why he omitted the truth from me, I have come to accept it. He was perhaps ashamed or afraid. Still, whatever his motives, they were his." Ava grabbed across the table and squeezed Reena's hand. "You have progressed a great distance, Reena. Most people would not have managed what you experienced the way you did. You have rebuilt your life using your own criteria." The first real smile Reena had let herself in what seemed like ages. She said, "I've had help," looking kindly at Ava. "And with time also aids greatly." Actually, Reena had at last come to terms with her background, though it would always be a part of her story. Dario's affair, his murder, Luca's betrayal, no longer define her. She had stopped wondering the countless what-if questions that had once plagued her. What if she had confronted Dario early? What if she had left him? What if she had never found out about Luca at all? There were no answers to these questions. Even if there were, they would not alter the events. Her attention now turned to the future and toward leading a life free of the weight of those years. Returning to her work as a botanical artist, she had discovered delight in the minute features of nature that had first motivated her. Her works had become more polished, more patient, as though the suffering she had gone through had helped her to appreciate the small beauty of life. Collectors started to notice, and Reena felt a sense of direction outside only survival. For the first time in years, she would sometimes pay Dario's grave visits. Though less frequent now, when she did visit, she found herself thinking back on the man he had been. The bits she had loved and the bits she would never totally understand. The rage vanished, replaced by a subdued melancholy, but also closure. She had forgiven him in her own manner, not for his treachery, but for the emotional mess that had driven him to lead a secret life. Many years following the trial, one morning Reena got a letter from Luca. It had passed the legal system and arrived from the jail, serving his life sentence. Not sure what to expect, her hands shook slightly as she opened it. The letter was brief and written in Luca's recognizable handwriting. "I'm sorry," it said here. "I never wanted for it to finish this way." Reena spent a lot of time staring at the words. She wasn't sure if Luca's apology was real or if it was merely another ploy, a last effort to rouse her feelings from behind prison. She paid no mind, though. She ripped the letter into tiny bits and scattered them across the garden, where the wind soon carried them away. That ended. Reena was immensely relieved to see the bits vanish into the ground. Her power was not derived from the past. Behind her now were the affair, the lies, the murder. She was free to live her life, not as the widow of a man with a secret life, but as a woman who had faced the worst aspects of herself and come out on the other side stronger. Her garden's softly moving blossoms served as a reminder that even the toughest winters could allow life to flourish.